All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas. I do educational videos on many different topics. We are right in the middle of studying up on the reciprocal system of theory of Dewey B. Larson. Larson was an engineer who born back in 1898, and in the about 1930 he started working on developing the reciprocal system. Finally got it to a point where he narrowed it down to basically two postulates, took those two postulates and built a theoretical universe from those, and started writing books on pretty much theory of everything. He's got books on chemistry, physics, astronomy, and we are looking at his final book that came out after he died. He died in 1990. This book came out in 1995. It's called Beyond Space and Time, and it is his contribution to metaphysics, mostly on the soft sciences, philosophy, religion, psychology, and those kind of things, consciousness studies, and we are right in the middle of chapter 8, which is called Communication Local. And the basic gist of the theory is that the universe is not made out of matter, and it's not made out of energy, but it is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. And space and time are reciprocal aspects of motion. So space and time are basically the numerator and the denominator of a ratio or relationship, and that is motion. The simplest example of that is speed. The car is moving 20 miles per hour. 20 miles of space in 1 hour of time. Space over time, that is speed. But it turns out all of our scientific entities, units, can be broken down in terms of space over time or time over space. Time and space both have 3 dimensions in Larson's system. Other people maybe say 3 or more dimensions. And they both come in discrete units. There's a minimum 1 unit of space and a 1 quantized, unit of time. And that 1 unit of space divided by that 1 unit of time is the speed of light. So the speed of light is 1 over 1. And unlike Einstein, where in Einstein's universe, the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe, in Larson's universe, the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, or the neutral point of the universe, where there's one entire universe that moves slower than the speed of light that he calls the material sector, and then there is 1/2 of the universe that moves faster than the speed of light, and that is called the cosmic sector, or the inverse sector. And he goes from there. And so this is really, eventually, when he starts applying this stuff to metaphysics, he comes up with four additional postulates that he needs to use, that we got into a few episodes ago. In chapters 5 through 7, he kind of derives what life is. And life is basically this material sector. The material sector is the inanimate world. This is the world of chemistry, atoms and molecules. And when atoms and molecules develop to their most complex level, which is DNA, the DNA molecule, at that point it becomes big enough to accommodate a cosmic unit, that he calls a control, and that this cosmic unit is able to incorporate itself into this material unit as a minor portion of it, but it takes control over it in the same way that a thermostat takes control over a room. The thermostat is a very small portion of that room, but it takes control of the environment of the room. And that is similar to how he describes life. Life is a combination of a material and cosmic unit in the right proportions, and which is really 1-to-1. But there is a loss in the translation, so to speak, moving across the boundary. And so actually this material sector unit has to be much, 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 much bigger than the cosmic unit. Now, once you have this life unit, then the life unit can become more and more and more complex. And, he talks about this in terms of the communication. First, it's communicating directly, through osmosis or, direct communication. Then it develops chemical messengers to communicate, to control. And then it develops electrical impulses. And the cellular biological organisms, the life organisms, become more and more complex until they reach their most complex state. And in that state, then they reach this boundary, and then they can be taken over from a unit, another control unit that is what he calls from Sector 3. Sector 3 is what he calls the general metaphysical region. And Sector 3 is actually independent of space and time. So what I reckon that metaphysical unit is really in the realm of the actual speed of light, this neutral area, neutral point that's moving actually at the speed of light, at which point time and space basically lose their significance. They resolve. So there's not an imbalance between time and space. There's not more time in the cosmic sector or more space in the material sector. There is instead a balance, and at that point it becomes a 1-to-1, and it just turns into one. And so they're resolved. And in this, so this is the Sector 3 unit, and the Sector 3 unit can eventually take control of the entire life unit. And he calls that ethical development. So now he's talking about the communication that can exist between this cosmic, this metaphysical control unit and the life unit. And we'll start there. The control unit exists in a physical location by virtue of its association with a biological organism, and also in a non-physical location, a location in existence as a whole, the general metaphysical region, as we have called it, by virtue of its own inherent nature. We may compare the coincidence of these two locations to the point of intersection of two lines. Such a point is located on both lines, and if these lines of communication, telephone lines, for example, communication via either line is feasible. We have no direct knowledge of the means of communication that exist in Sector 3, but in view of the multiplicity of communication media that are available in the material and cosmic sectors, there is an ample basis from which to extrapolate the existence of communication facilities to the metaphysical region. Indeed, there is reason to believe that there should be more channels open for communication in Sector 3 than in the space-time universe, as the specific properties of space and time are, in a sense, limitations, and there is greater flexibility where such limitations do not exist. We have already arrived at the conclusion that Sector 3 existences are intelligent. That was one of his metaphysical postulates. Okay, we have already arrived at the conclusion that Sector 3 existences are intelligent. And since intelligent biological organisms are fully able to communicate with each other by means available in their sector of the universe, the intelligent units from Sector 3 should be able to communicate with each other by means available in their sector of the universe. The inability to detect any physical evidence of such communication is not an argument against its existence, as it was against communication between Sector 2 through Sector 2 channels. As noted earlier, the Sector 2 communication, if it existed, would be physical and therefore detectable physically. But the Sector 3 communication is not physical, and consequently, it cannot be expected that there will be any physical way of detecting it. On the basis of the considerations outlined in the foregoing paragraphs, we must conclude that direct communication through Sector 3 channels between the control units that direct the activities of ethical man is definitely possible. Then let us ask, is there any evidence that such communication actually takes place? And he says there can be no question as to the answer. The validity of the evidence of this nature is hotly debated, but its existence is undeniable. This process and associated phenomena are systematically studied in the universities and research institutes. The reports of investigations of these phenomena are published and discussed in various journals, and a considerable body of literature on the subject now exists. Inasmuch as the conclusions that have been reached as to the ability of the control units to communicate directly with each other through their own channels are based on factual premises and have been derived from these premises by sound scientific reasoning, so that they have a high probability of being correct, even if observational evidence were entirely lacking, any supporting evidence from observational or experimental sources is highly significant. Obviously, however, the better the evidence, the more support it gives. An appraisal of the validity of the evidence that has been accumulated is therefore in order. Okay, now we'll skip a couple of his very lengthy sentences and cut to the punchline that he is building up to. The particular phenomena with which we are now concerned has been given the name telepathy. And it is one of several somewhat similar phenomena that are grouped under the designation of extrasensory perception, abbreviated ESP. Closely connected with telepathy is clairvoyance, which is obtaining knowledge of facts or events by direct apprehension without utilizing physical means. If this information concerns the future, the term precognition is applied. And it is rather difficult to draw dividing lines and to place observed events directly in one class or the other. And so we'll just refer to it as ESP general. A related phenomena, psychokinesis, which is non-physical action upon matter, is sometimes classed with ESP, but psychokinesis is not a communication phenomenon, and hence it is clearly on a different footing. Since the present discussion is concerned only with communication, no consideration will be given to psychokinesis at this point, but it will be discussed later. The current situation in the ESP area is expressed by this particular scholar as follows. Certain problems that were taboo in physics a generation ago, researches in which physicists indulged at the risk of losing his reputation, such as paranormal perception and clairvoyance, are now more widely regarded as worthy of consideration. Again, Larson goes through the scientific literature to kind of justify his foray into it, saying that, oh, this is now more acceptable. We can do this without losing our jobs, and so on and so forth. I'm not sure, I understand where Larson's coming from, but it just kind of muddies the waters for him when he starts going into the long literature review of different scholars who have dealt with whatever question he's talking about in order to kind of justify his position. It would, in my opinion, it would be much more beneficial for him to just lay out his opinion and, you know, this is it. This is, you know, I'm not, the reciprocal system of theory is not reliant upon any of these scholars to give it any credence. It relies upon itself. It's a bunch of postulates, and it's a bunch of deductions from the postulates, and it's independent of any type of scholar. So I think he just hurts his case when he does this, but so we're going to just skip over that. And we're going to get to, in beginning an examination of the arguments that are adduced against the reality of ESP, we will first consider the issues raised by Price in the article from which the victory quotation was taken. Well, okay, we'll skip this. To support his contention that ESP and accepted science are incompatible, he offers the list of conflicts. And so this is he gives 8, Price gives 8 reasons why ESP is no good. And I don't know why, so I think I'm just going to continue to skip over this. And he kind of debunks all of these different reasons why it shouldn't exist. I don't think that is really Larson's responsibility to do that. I think instead he should just lay out what he suggests, what he thinks, what his deductions are, and, you know, read them and weep. If you don't agree with it, then you don't agree with it. Okay. I suggest that the discovery of the psi phenomena, or ESP, consciousness, psychic consciousness, has brought us to a point at which we must question basic theories because they lead us to expectations contradicted by the experimental results. Now that the development of the reciprocal system has clarified the basic relationships, he identifies which of these authors that he just reviewed are correct and, you know, who isn't. And then he gets back into more and more, you know, discussion. I mean, I know he's trying to contextualize himself, to put himself into the conversation with all of these other scholars. But again, I think that Larson's best audience is an intelligent 13-year-old or an intelligent adult who doesn't really have an extensive scientific background. I find that the people the more science that you have, the more invested you have in the current science, and the less open your mind is going to be toward toward adapting a new theory. And so Larson is kind of beating his head against the wall, trying to place himself into this literature that already exists. And he uses a lot of justifications and hedging. Slow progress in a new field of study is not necessarily an indication of the lack of reality of the phenomena being investigated. And I mean, I've literally gone through about 10 pages of him placing himself into the literature. The lack of reproducibility of ESP results is, a serious defect in the case for the reality of the phenomena. In the so-called natural sciences, a discovery reported in one laboratory or observatory is promptly checked by many others or in many others, and whether or not attempts to reproduce the results are successful is an important factor, usually the most important factor, in determining whether the discovery will be accepted as authentic. The critics of the ESP investigations argue that this criterion of reproducibility should be equally applicable to the ESP results, and that inasmuch as it is generally, perhaps always, true in the ESP field that the original results cannot be reproduced by other investigators, the standard practice of science requires that these results be rejected. And so he's kind of looking at this as being, something that the ESP, boosters are going to have to get over this hurdle. The reasoning of these critics is entirely valid, but their premises are erroneous. ESP and experiments have never been repeated under identical conditions, unless it has happened by accident. Attempts have been made to reproduce the physical conditions of an experiment as closely as possible, but aside from such effects as they may have on the non-physical situation, these physical conditions are completely irrelevant. In order to repeat an experiment on a non-physical phenomenon such as ESP under identical conditions, it is necessary to reproduce the non-physical conditions. Okay, so he's putting it on a different track there. It's not so much the physical conditions, it is the non-physical conditions that also have to be duplicated in order to be able to reproduce the experiment. And how are you going to do that if it's non-physical? So you would have to be able to approach it in an entirely different way. Okay. All right. I guess that's all the time we've got. We'll see you tomorrow.